That's something that I think about semi-frequently. Will Britney ever want to share this side of her life with people? What's going on, guys? This is Jordan Miller. I'm the owner and founder of Breathe Heavy, and in this video, I'm going to give my thoughts on the New York Times new documentary, Framing Britney Spears. But before we dive into the video, let's play that intro. If you're a returning subscriber, thank you so much. It's greatly appreciated. And if you're new here, welcome. Breathe Heavy is a pop music news community, but it started out in 2004 as a Britney Spears fan site. I encourage you, after you're done watching my YouTube videos, to go over to Breathe Heavy and create an account. It's completely free, takes less than 30 seconds, and you're gonna be joining a really amazing community. The New York Times just released about an hour-long documentary explaining the situation that Britney Spears is currently in regarding the conservatorship and everything that led up to it. As I mentioned, it's titled Framing Britney Spears and premiered on FX and Hulu. If you haven't checked it out, I highly suggest to definitely go and give it a stream. There may or may not be links floating around the internet in case you don't have Hulu or FX. I'm not advocating anything, I'm just saying they might exist. Now, in this documentary, there was a lot to absorb, so before I give my thoughts, I'd like to bring to light a couple of the things that they shared in the documentary that I think are really important. First things first is that they portray Britney in a very sympathetic light, which I think is really important considering for many, many years, Britney was not portrayed in that kind of a light. In fact, quite the opposite. For many years, as I documented Britney Spears' rise to superstardom during the In the Zone era, and then during the whole 2007, 2008 era, and then the conservatorship being put in place and everything after the fact, I've been a first-hand witness to seeing how the media has treated her over the years. I've always tried to portray Britney in the best light possible. Now, that doesn't mean that I try to pretend that certain things didn't happen, but I always wrote about her, at least in my opinion, through the lens of being someone who is a strong, enduring woman who was essentially thrust into the limelight, and watched her be able to thrive and cope with the situation that she's been in. And before I dive into my thoughts about Framing Britney Spears, I just did an interview today with Nylon in France, and one of the parts of the interview I had mentioned about being very proud of Breathe Heavy, and I wanted to be able to share that in this video really quick. I'm proud because this documentary, for example, is bringing to light this injustice that I've personally been writing about for the last 13 years. And I'm very grateful that there's enough momentum and attention that people are tuning into this. So documentaries like Framing Britney Spears or some of the other ones that I think are in the works, I find extremely important, and I'm just very grateful that they're happening. Now, I did actually do a few interviews with Samantha Stark. She's the director of Framing Britney Spears. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic and they already had kind of things in the works with other people, I wasn't able to make the cut. Though I am really grateful that I at least got to be a part of this documentary in some capacity, even though I didn't get to make it onto camera. Now, I do feel a little bit like the kid who gets picked last for dodgeball. But ultimately, I know that this isn't about me, and I'm just very grateful for the people who did contribute, because I think this is just extremely important. Okay, so there's a lot of information in this documentary, so I'm going to just say a couple of the things that I think are noteworthy that deserve your undivided attention. First, they make the really valid point, something that I personally have also been saying for many years, that if Britney is able to record music and go on tour and raise her children and all that, then she doesn't appear to be someone who qualifies for a conservatorship. They did not shy away from that irony. They were very blatant about that, so I think that was really good. Another thing that I think is really worth mentioning is that Felicia Culotta, Britney's longtime assistant, was front and center of this documentary. She does say something like, I don't know what a conservatorship is, but I think she meant it in terms of she doesn't understand why Britney Spears needs to be in a conservatorship, especially because she's seen firsthand what Britney's capable of. That's very important because conservatorships are meant for people who are essentially not capable of really doing anything to be able to function. So we have someone who's going on camera to say, I was there firsthand throughout all of this and know that Britney is capable of a lot, which is no surprise to all of us, but it was really refreshing to hear that from someone who was part of Britney's life on a day-to-day basis. Now, Felicia's contribution, I think if we pause for a moment and think about it, it tells a lot. I highly doubt she would agree to do this interview without speaking to Britney's mom, Lynn, first. Although this is speculative, I would imagine that Lynn and Britney had spoken about this. Which brings to light this Project Rose thing that Britney had been talking about a lot last year. It's very conspiratorial, but roses are featured a lot in this documentary. If you take a look at Britney's Instagram, she talked about Project Rose a lot. She posts a lot about roses. She takes photos with roses in her hair. If you took that leap of faith and maybe made the connection that perhaps Britney did have some say in this documentary in some capacity, a passive say perhaps, I'm willing to personally make that leap. It's just hard to truly know because at one point the New York Times does mention that they did reach out to Britney and that they aren't even sure if Britney ever got their request for her to contribute to this. So if you think of it that way, if Britney really did want to have a say in this documentary, then I would imagine she would have responded, we just don't know. Another thing I think is very important that this documentary shared with people is that they make it clear that Britney does not want her dad in control of her estate or really just in the picture at all at this point. They did a good job of painting Jamie Spears as accurately as possible, being someone who didn't really have any sort of involvement in Britney's life aside from wanting her to generate him money, which, as we know, still today is currently happening. And on the opposite side of that, they illustrate Lynn as being someone who was really there for Britney every step of the way. Now, they also had quite a few interviews contribute to this documentary, and one of them that I found the most interesting was Adam Streisand. Streisand was a lawyer who tried to represent Britney in the very early stages of the conservatorship, but he was actually denied by the judge because the judge, according to some medical report, claimed that Britney was not competent enough to make the decision to hire her own lawyer. And we don't know exactly what that medical report says, and he even says that himself in the interview. He says, we don't know what we don't know. But what we do know is that Jamie Spears tried to claim that Britney has dementia, or at least had dementia, and that's why a conservatorship needed to be put into place. But we can clearly see that Britney doesn't qualify to be a candidate of dementia, and I'm obviously no doctor, but people with dementia aren't able to go on tour. And what's really powerful about his presence in this documentary is that someone from the legal system attempted to represent Britney and was denied. Now, the documentary didn't go into another attorney named John Eardley, who Britney also tried to hire, and there are voicemails on the internet of Britney essentially pleading with Eardley to represent her because she fears her dad's gonna take her kids away from her. Which reminds me that there's actually so much that wasn't covered in this documentary, but it's really because it's not possible to fit all of this into an hour-long special. Speaking of lawyers, they also had a woman named Vivian Thoreen, and her appearance is actually pretty funny because in her interview, she says that she personally has never seen anyone be able to terminate a conservatorship. And then after her interview concludes, the New York Times puts on their screen saying that she rejoined Jamie Spears' legal team in the time since after her interview. So that didn't paint her in the best light, but she made her bed and now she needs to lie in it. Which reminds me, they didn't actually mention Lou Taylor at all in this documentary. And I'm a little suspicious of that, but I think it's because the New York Times did get legal threats prior to this documentary even airing. And I don't know what those threats entailed, but they may have just wanted to sidestep her in general and not deal with any sort of legal aftermath. Although they are the New York Times, and I'm sure they have a fleet of people that could defend them. I do think it would have been interesting had they mentioned Lou Taylor, but I'm hoping that other projects coming out in the future take a little look at her. Another theme that's very prevalent in Framing Britney Spears is the fact that Britney was sexualized very early on in her career. They do this through a feministic lens, and they include interviews from Britney's past where she's asked questions that are completely and utterly inappropriate. For instance, Britney being 17 years old and asks about her breasts, or when she's like 10 years old and the host asks her about boys, and it just was a very icky thing to look back on. They did include an excerpt from Britney's MTV documentary For the Record, which aired in 2008, where it's the only time she really addresses the conservatorship, or at least it made it to air. In it, of course, Britney says that she would feel so liberated if she wasn't under the restraints that she's currently under, having all these doctors and lawyers look at her, and then she ultimately bursts into tears saying, I'm sad. That's a very important interview in Britney's career because it's one of the only times that she was able to address it and make it to air. So I'm glad that people are getting to be reminded of this interview, because here we are 13 years later and nothing's changed. So if she felt that she wasn't liberated back then, certainly she, in some capacity, must feel that way now. I would say 50 to 60% of this documentary is looking back on some milestones that happened in Britney's life to kind of paint a picture of how she got to where she is now. They include her breakup with Justin Timberlake, the paparazzi constantly chasing her, the custody battle with Kevin Federline, her shaving her head, and also being put into an ambulance to be taken to a hospital. Those were tough moments to look back on. I personally try to stay away from them because I remember writing about them at the time they were happening. I don't tend to want to look back on those moments too much because I think those were really dark times in Britney's life. But I also think it's important for people to remember that at that time when Britney had shaved her head, for instance, she was ridiculed and mocked. I think that we're in a much better place in 2021 regarding celebrities and just people in general's mental health. They did include a lot about the Free Britney movement. In the beginning of the documentary, they show the Free Britney movement uniting outside the Los Angeles Superior Court, and fans are energized in an effort to shed light on this injustice and hopefully inspire some change. Some of the interviews that they feature in this documentary include Britney activists like Britney's Gram, for instance. They recant their story of the voicemail, which really kicked this movement into high gear. And Kevin from Free Britney LA also makes an appearance, as does a woman named Leanne Simmons. She created a timeline of everything you need to know. While I do think I would have been an awesome fit for this documentary, I do feel a little jealous, but not in a bad way. I am grateful for everyone that did contribute, and if you guys are watching this, huge props to you. That was just really awesome to see you guys kill it. Now, my overall thoughts on the documentary, although I do think that there was a lot of information that I personally already knew, it's because I've been following this for my entire adult life. I think its job is to inform people who are less familiar, and I think it accomplishes that. I don't think that they portray Britney as a victim, which I think there's a real fine line for that. I think they still kept Britney in a place where she's empowered, but there's no denying that a lot has transpired in Britney's life, and they show in pretty great detail what that is. I think overall it was a really great watch. For me, it flew by like that, and that's obviously a sign of great filmmaking. Ultimately, one of the things that I took away the most is what Felicia said, in that she believes that one day Britney will tell her story. She says something to the effect that she just knows Britney will do that. And that's something that I think about semi-frequently. Will Britney ever want to share this side of her life with people? So far, Britney's really, for the most part, remained silent about all this, aside from saying in a court document via her lawyer, Sam Ingham, that she appreciates the fans' informed support. Britney, for the most part, has strayed away from mentioning Free Britney and the conservatorship. We only know Britney Spears right now through her Instagram posts, and there's a huge debate there even still today whether it's Britney actually posting that or not. For me, I do tend to agree with Miss Felicia that Britney will come forward one day and share her truth, and I hope she does do that because I think that she could inspire so many people. She already does, but to be able to be vulnerable and open up about something that she may find to be scary to talk about or not want to let people in on that side of her life, I think if she did in fact do that, she would change a lot of people's lives, and that's something that she's been able to do throughout her career. But I think in terms of what's going on in her life and how the circumstance, a lot of it is out of her control and is up to the Los Angeles probate court system to correct course. I think that once the situation has changed, at the very least, her dad being removed from power, I think Britney will feel more comfortable to want to open up about it. That's my hope. You never know, and if she decides to never speak about it, I honestly understand that too. What do you think of Framing Britney Spears? I'm super curious to know what everyone thinks. At the time of this recording, I've gotten a lot of messages from people being like, you haven't said anything about it, why aren't you speaking about it? It's because I wanted to share my thoughts here on YouTube with you guys, and I'm hoping that you, in turn, share your thoughts in the comments below. I'm just going to put on the screen what Miss Samantha said about my YouTube channel. So do me a solid and help me prove her wrong by subscribing. It would be greatly appreciated. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Outro.